There's been a lot of talk recently about people not wanting to date those with different politics. This talk seems to be mostly coming from the right. I'll start here with 2 example quotes. I could certainly find more, but I wouldn't want to put you through that, dear viewer. A Trump administration official quoted in the Washingtonian says,
"A lot of times you'll connect with somebody and they'll Google you, find out you worked for Trump's campaign, and then it's pretty much all downhill from there."
It carries over to the UK too, with Tories complaining that a lot of people don't want to date them because of their politics. For example, one Tory penned an article entitled,
"Undateable at 29. Are my views too problematic for Hinge and Bumble?"
He went on to say,
"All university-educated London dwellers aged between 24 and 33. There was a recurring theme. No Tories allowed."
The thing is, these right-wingers aren't wrong that a lot of people with different politics don't want to date them. But is that even purely because of politics? And even if it is, are they right in complaining about that? We're going to be talking about all that and more on this episode of Political-psych-abby. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Abby. On this channel, I talk about a bunch of topics relating to the psychology of politics. If you like what I do, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. Also, I recently started a Patreon. I'll link to that and my socials below. I also want to mention that this video is a companion piece to my last video on the psychology of sex and politics. You don't have to watch them in any particular order, but if you find this video interesting, you should check that one out. Alright, let's jump right in. So there's a lot of evidence that people are more likely to end up married or in a long-term relationship with someone of the same political affiliation, at least in the American context. For some reason I cannot fathom, I could simply not find statistics on this for the UK. According to 538, about 30% of married households contain a mismatched partisan pair, but only about a third of those are Democrats married to Republicans. Most are Democrats or Republicans partnered to independents. I should mention that these specific statistics do not include same-sex couples or couples with different last names, but results when same-sex couples and couples with different last names are included are similar. I should mention the choice to only sample different sex couples with the same last name for this article is done to avoid accidentally counting non-couples as couples, not for weird regressive political reasons. You can read more about that in the article if you're curious. In addition, as you can see, because more women are Democrats, it is more common for a Democrat woman to be married to a Republican man than a Republican woman to be married to a Democrat man, although neither pairing is very common. Also, there are actually more mixed partisanship pairs among younger couples, but that's because younger people are more likely to be independents. Democrat-Republican pairs are actually more common among older people. Okay, but does this actually mean that people are choosing partners based on politics? Well, it's not just that. For example, people tend to gravitate to those who are more like them on a variety of demographic variables, and these demographics do correlate to partisanship. Plus, Republicans and Democrats, at least, are often at different stages of life or on different life paths that make them less likely to end up together. Also, geography is definitely worth mentioning. Like, in my neighborhood, Trump got less than 5% of the vote in 2020. If for some unfathomable reason I was looking to date a Republican, I would have to try pretty hard even to find one. Although, I think my neighborhood is maybe an extreme example. There's a rock here commemorating Barack and Michelle Obama's first kiss, which honestly seems a little intrusive as something to commemorate. Like, did the Obamas want this rock to exist? Was there a dedication ceremony where they reenacted the kiss? Was it put there to up the property values of the strip mall it's in front of? I could probably find out, but honestly, I would rather savor the mystery. Anyway, back on topic, it is pretty clear that the politics of potential partners is relevant in dating, although how relevant is unclear. Let's talk some psychology. Molinas, Crawford, and Cole found that when people discovered that their potential mates were ideologically dissimilar to them, they liked them less, were less romantically interested in them, rated them as less attractive, and became less comfortable with them. This was fairly equally true for Democrats and Republicans. It is hard to figure out the true extent that partisanship factors into choosing a partner, so let's look at some polling data. Let's start with the US. I do want to mention as an aside that for some reason a lot of the research on this topic is more US centric, so unless I specifically say something is about the UK, I'm basing it off a US study, although a lot of it probably carries over. Anyway, on to the polls. According to a YouGov poll, about 43% of Americans said they would be comfortable dating a member of the opposite political party. 44% said it would make them uncomfortable. American discomfort with dating someone from the opposite political party does seem to be growing. To quote the YouGov study, Democrats, 53%, are more likely than Republicans, 47%, and Independents, 40%, to say dating someone affiliated with the opposite political party would make them uncomfortable. I'm a bit confused what the opposite political party is to an independent, though. Later in the video, I'm going to go into why Democrats might be more hesitant to date across party lines. Although, as I was talking about before, in experimental conditions, Republicans and Democrats have similar reactions to finding out a potential mate opposes them politically. Women were generally less comfortable dating across party lines than men, with 48% of women surveyed being uncomfortable dating across party lines versus 40% of men. This makes sense, especially if these women are Democrats looking not to date Republicans due to Republican stances on women's rights. However, this study does not do a simultaneous breakdown by gender and party, so possibly Republican women are also more choosy. In addition, non-white Democrats are more hesitant than white Democrats to date Republicans. This makes sense to me, at least, if you consider the Republican record on racial issues and the overt racism of many Republicans in recent years. In addition, as of 2010, 49% of Republicans would be somewhat or very unhappy about their child marrying a Democrat. For Democratic parents, 33% would be somewhat or very unhappy about their child marrying a Republican. Data for after 2010 was not readily available, but there does seem to be an increase over time in parents of both parties disapproving of inter-party marriage. It is interesting that here the Republicans are more choosy, as it runs opposite to the general trend. Maybe Republican parents are more likely to think that they should have more say in the lives of their children? In the UK, YouGov also found a significant number of people not wanting to date across party lines. Yet again, those in more left-leaning political parties were less likely to be comfortable dating their opposition. Side note before we get into the numbers. In the UK, there is more of a distinction between being a member of a party and voting for that party than there is in the US, so that's why the study breaks it down that way. Also, if you don't know the difference between the different UK political parties, you can check out my last video in which I explain that, or find something written by an actual British person who knows more about British politics than me. There are also more political parties in the UK that they're going to be covered here. I could only really find enough info on the dating preferences of members of the two biggest parties. Anyway, some 49% of conservatives would date someone who voted Labour in the 2019 election, with around a quarter, 24%, saying they would not. Another 43% of conservatives would date someone who is a member of the Labour Party, with 31% opposed to the idea of doing so. Among Labour voters, 35% would date a conservative voter, however, half would not. Further to this, only 27% would date a member of the Conservative Party, while 6 in 10 would not, including a third, 34%, who would definitely not. About 60% from each party said they would date someone who didn't vote in 2019. Women are, in general, less likely to want to date someone from the opposing party. In the case of Labour voters, this makes some sense, as Labour voting women may see Tories as less supportive of their rights, which could cause tension and knock-on effects in the relationship. But it is odd that this carries over to Tories as well, as in more Tory women than men are hesitant to date Labour voters. Some of this may be that women tend to be more left-leaning, so if one assumes most of the Tories surveyed are heterosexual, Tory women would have fewer options eliminated by not dating Labourites than Tory men do. Maybe Tory men are just desperate. That is certainly how their own op-eds make them seem, although that is just speculation. The pattern of Tories expressing more openness to cross-party dating extends to parents' views of their kids' potential partners. In 2012, a study found that a quarter of Labour voters would be upset if their kid married a Tory. Interestingly, that same study found that slightly fewer, 23% of Labour voters, would be upset by their kid marrying a UKIP supporter. This surprises me, as UKIP is in some ways more radically right-wing than the Tories. Possibly this is due to animosity between Tories and Labour being more embedded in British society, and maybe it is due to some Labour voters being anti-EU membership. Meanwhile, only 12% of Tories are upset by the idea of their kid marrying a Labour supporter. I should mention before you get the idea that Tories are massively more tolerant, that generally speaking, Labourites and Lib Dems are more likely to be accepting of those from other demographics. Also, political intolerance is very different from intolerance on the basis of something like race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, or disability. With the exception of religion, those are not things you choose, and for the most part, unlike your politics, they don't affect anyone who doesn't want to be affected by them. So, ideological discrimination is different from other forms of discrimination and can happen for totally reasonable reasons. Still, a lot of people are very alarmed about these trends of people not wanting to marry or date across party or not wanting their children to. Klofstad, McDermott, and Hatemi even posit that because much of politics is received from the parents, either genetically or via the environment, if people don't mate outside their parties, this will increase polarization. Honestly, they probably aren't wrong, although what we get from our parents does not determine all of our politics. That's why societal progress is, possible across generations. If you're interested more in the genetics of politics, I have a video about that. Anyway, the way that polarization is discussed generally kind of bothers me. I'm not trying to call out these specific authors. While disunity in a society is probably bad, so is unity on a bad thing. I would rather live in a society that is polarized with some people pushing for good things and some people pushing for bad things than everyone pushing together for bad. I also think that the way polarization is discussed in general involves a problematic amount of both sidesism. There is a real issue where people on the right side of an issue could walk back their rhetoric or even their actions in fear of stoking polarization. In addition, polarization is asymmetric, at least in the US, with Republicans being more polarized than Democrats. I would also argue that what are commonly conceptualized as the extremes are not morally equal. Free healthcare and education not being the equivalent of ending the rights of women and minorities and letting poor people starve. There is this issue where political scientists and psychologists get bogged down in trying to be objective and scientific and forget that political movements they study have different substance and consequences. See, I don't have to be bogged down by appearing impartial, because this is YouTube, and I can do whatever I want. Watch me go mad with power to my roughly 500 subscribers. Mwahaha. Also, regarding polarization, I think it is worth mentioning that in the US at least, one side does seem to have a firmer grip on objective reality. See climate denial, COVID denial, and Q. But how does any of this relate back to dating? Well, I would say that dating to avoid polarization is not a sensible goal. After all, the point isn't producing the most politically moderate offspring. That would be such a weird eugenics-y thing, and also probably lead to really unhappy relationships. I, for one, would like to argue in favor of basing relationships off of mutual love, support, and respect. I know, what a fringe take. Okay, but now let's talk about whether politics is actually a bad criteria when dating. Well, most of us would agree that insisting that a potential partner agree with you on everything is a bit much. But this isn't about agreeing on everything. So is it right to want a partner from the same party? I think to answer that, we've got to ask a related question. Is it okay to want a partner who shares your values? I think most people would say yes. It's not impossible to find someone whose politics differ from your own and who shares your values. If you'll permit me to use myself as an example, my partner is a communist. I'm not, and we share plenty of values. Although I doubt those on the right would applaud my political tolerance and open-mindedness in dating someone to the left of myself. Regarding dating someone with shared values but different politics, it's a matter of the same goals but different ideas of how they should be achieved. And being with someone with different ideas than you and a different approach than you can be really good and healthy and help you grow as a person. It can even help you in your activism. But there's a difference between different methods and different values. In order to illustrate this, I'm going to give you my non-exhaustive values checklist, not in any particular order, for a potential long-term partner. This list is entirely theoretical, as I am in a very happy monogamous relationship that may well continue to the end of my days. Do not somehow develop a parasocial crush on me only from my voice. I am extremely taken. If it helps, you can imagine me as incredibly ugly. My first criteria is believing that people should not starve, go homeless, or die of treatable illness due to poverty. I generally have a rule against dating assholes, and I think that if you think that those in poverty should suffer horribly, you're probably not very nice. My second criteria is a belief in women's rights and general opposition to patriarchal systems. Yet again, this feeds into the no assholes thing, but also, I am a woman who dates men, so the political is extremely personal here. Like, this is a safety and autonomy issue. Also, I refuse to date men who don't do housework. My third criteria is being in favor of the rights of people from marginalized groups, as well as having a generally respectful attitude towards them. This relates to my no assholes thing. But also I have friends and family from marginalized groups, and being a jerk to people I care about personally is an absolute deal breaker. Number 4 is a belief in democracy. This is pretty self-explanatory, and I just have a general rule against dating totalitarians. Number 5 is an actual commitment to the values I just described. We will get into number 5 a bit more later. So you can tell that an actually pretty wide swath of people are going to fit into these values. So it's not like I would only ever go out with someone with my exact political inclinations. Thing is, though, if we're talking about the American context, this list does eliminate basically all Republicans I've ever met, as well as admittedly many others. It would be easier to put no Republicans on a dating profile than to post this entire list, and might honestly seem less insufferable. At this point, Republicans aren't, for the most part, people with a different idea of achieving the same goals as me. Some of them might, in theory, believe in 1 through 4 of the list I just gave, and then support the Republican Party for some other reason. The issue, though, is that they will come up against number 5. Because if you believe 1 through 4 and still vote Republican, you probably aren't actually that committed to those values, as the Republican Party as a group consistently undermines them. Still, I don't know if I would put a blanket no Republicans in a dating profile. I have never dated a Republican. I've actually only dated like 2 Americans in my entire life. I've also never made a dating profile. I have to say, online dating seems hellish, so good luck out there, people. What I have done is dated a Tory. Well, it was like 2 dates and a lot of texting. He was on the surface okay on values 2 through 4, and he wasn't obviously bad on number 1, although I think if I had understood British politics better at the time, many of the Tory policies he supported would have been a violation of 1, and to some extent 2, 3, and maybe 4 for that matter. Thing is, he would definitely constitute a violation of my rule number 5. Still, I had only moved to the UK less than a year before going out with him, and I hadn't grasped the politics yet. So I really did see him as someone with different ways of achieving similar goals. Honestly, it wasn't a bad 2 dates. I don't have some horror story to tell you. He was the first guy to actually bother flirting with me. He was the first guy to tell me I was hot. He was charming and reasonably good looking. I liked all of that. He wasn't a great kisser, and that very short relationship did ruin Attack on Titan for me, but I don't think any of that is the fault of him being a Tory. I think the ruining an anime thing is just a symptom of my being a nerd who dates other nerds, and that's on me. He broke it off for, as far as I can tell, completely apolitical reasons, and I bear him no ill will for that. Thing is, I don't think we would have worked long term, and that is because of a difference in values. I don't want to get into too much detail here, but it later became very clear that he did not share my values. Honestly, I don't remember all the precise details, although I do remember more than I'm saying here. Still, I don't want to have to go on social media and Facebook stalk a guy I went on 2 dates with 5 years ago, just so I can get the details right for a YouTube video. So maybe for some people left of center, writing no Tories or no Republicans is a way of filtering out people who don't share their core values. As much as people will often frame these values as abstract things, they're often not abstract and theoretical in a dating situation. If you're dating someone, you probably don't want them to have prejudiced attitudes towards people you care about, or even to yourself. You also have to make sure that the person you're dating believes in your rights to your own body and your own choices, because typically people you're dating get intimate access to your body in a way others don't. I think it's also important to bring up children here. Obviously, not everyone dates looking for a potential future parent of their child, but a lot of people do. And for even more, they aren't looking for that right now, but they might be down the road. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to co-parent with someone who might end up prejudiced against their own child. And it's not even just prejudice, it's approaches to a lot of things that have to do with bringing up kids. For example, I wouldn't want to raise kids with someone who thought it was okay to hit them. Republicans are somewhat more likely to be in favor of spanking children, although the patterns around it are far more complex than that. Also, I would want my theoretical future children to receive comprehensive sex education and to not be expected to be abstinent till marriage. Now, I'm sure some Republicans would agree with me on that, but there is still a partisan divide. A fun anecdote here, my great-grandmother from the old country used to tell her descendants to try before you buy, which I think means I can count being pro premarital sex as a family value. Also, this is not a needlepoint she made. I made it for this video. I spent 6 hours making something that's on the screen for 30 seconds here. I may have a problem. I also do want to mention that the politics of dating is affected by who you are. For example, if you're from a racial or religious minority, you probably don't want to date someone who will be prejudiced towards you or won't be empathetic to your experiences. This is not a purely partisan pattern, but several forms of prejudice are more common in some parties, primarily right-wing ones. In addition, if you're LGBT, you might not want to date someone who is still in the closet for political reasons, or whose politics run contrary to your rights, and sadly sometimes also their own. If you'll permit me to illustrate this with an anecdote, I knew a gay progressive Democrat who had been seeing this Trump supporter guy. They got on well and were enjoying their relationship. But the Trump supporter didn't want to come out and wanted to introduce the guy he was dating to his parents, but just as his friend. The progressive guy did not want his relationship to work that way, so they stopped seeing each other. Now, obviously situations like this one don't only exist along partisan lines, but I still feel like it was important to bring up. What you might not expect is that there are completely apolitical reasons that dating across party lines present problems. Afifi and all found that couples who voted differently in the 2016 election experienced more stress and put less effort into maintaining their relationship as they felt more distant from each other. Neither the authors of this article nor myself would say that couples that vote differently can't have healthy relationships, but voting differently, at least in highly contentious elections, does seem to put stress on a relationship. I actually know a woman personally whose marriage is struggling because her husband is really into Trump and because of the personality changes that he's gone through since getting really into Trump. I also want to point out that a lot of this is probably going to be more of a thing for political obsessives like myself. I've mostly dated other people with some interest in politics, because sharing interests is good in a relationship. So yeah, in a relationship with someone really into politics, there'll be a lot of talking about politics. You'd be crazy to think that I don't talk about videos I'm planning endlessly with my partner, and I need to be with someone who's not going to be annoyed by that. So I would cut some of these right-wingers some slack and say that maybe politics just isn't an important aspect of a relationship for them. The thing is, most of those most vocal about this are highly political. Some even have political jobs. And it would be weird to be with someone who disapproves of what you do for a living, even if it does produce some fantastic dramatic tension on Billions. Which, by the way, I think I may have found spoilers for while finding this image. I'm only on season 3. Please, nobody spoil it for me. In addition, partners often support each other in their careers, like talking out work issues, editing things, and accompanying each other to work events. It makes sense to want to be with someone whose work you can admire, or at least whose work you don't have a problem with. I'm definitely editorializing here, but much of the left-wingers won't date me discourse comes from straight conservative men. And the lack of value placed on shared values and interests with a partner portrays a somewhat shallow approach to relationships and to women specifically. And some shallow relationships are totally fine, but these guys aren't saying liberal/left-wing women won't have casual one-night stands with me. They're saying that they won't date them. I do also want to mention as a final note that dating apps may also increase partisan filtering because people have so much choice on dating apps that they have to filter by a bunch of things to end up with a manageable array of prospects. I think there are instances in which people give people they meet IRL more leeway in a way they don't give it on apps. In at least some instances, but not necessarily this one, that is a downside of dating apps. So what even is my point with this video? Firstly, people do tend to partner up with those with similar politics, but that is only partially due to those politics. Secondly, while open-mindedness to different ideas in theory is good, that does not obligate anyone to date someone who is not a good, reasonable person who shares their values and they get along with. Thirdly, while not dating across party lines may increase polarization, there are more important factors at stake here, both on a personal and political level. In less formal terms, it is 100% okay to not want to date a conservative. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thank you so much to my patron, Nachi. If you would also like to become a patron and have your name and pet in the credits in addition to other fun perks, head over to my Patreon where you can join for as little as $1 a month. It really helps the channel. Also, you can submit a political psychology topic for the future video by commenting it below or by sending it to me via any of my social media accounts linked below. Thanks again for watching. Thank you to Joseph and Adam for lending their voices to this video.